Hey, this is Geoff Gannon, and you're listening to the Focus Compounding Podcast. This is the podcast where Andrew and I talk general investing concepts. To learn about specific stocks I like, go to focuscompoundinggazette.com. That's focuscompoundinggazette.com, and enter your email. Once you enter your email, you'll start getting one free 2,000-word stock write-up a week. Andrew and I also manage accounts for clients. To learn more about our managed accounts, email Andrew at info@focuscompounding.com or text or call Andrew at 469-207-5844. And now here's Andrew with your regularly scheduled podcast.
All right, we are back. How is everybody doing? Hope you are doing well. Andrew Kuhn, Focus Compounding Podcast. Geoff Gannon, Focus Compounding Podcast. Can't even pronounce it. You can see your face too, and we don't have the keg cups out today, like people were saying last week on Twitter. I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in with us here today. If you do want to get access to Geoff's weekly Gazette that goes out, maybe you could explain also why you started calling it a Gazette instead of a memo. A lot of people have asked that.
It has a 10 overlooked stocks to watch, at least one write-up of a stock, so a 2,000-word write-up. And now it has something from you at the end, too.
That's right. We have it's called What's on Andrew's Mind. Mm-hmm. And I have full autonomy to write about anything I want, right?
Yep.
If I think, if I want to write about the sky being blue, I'm going to write about the sky being blue. But no, I'm always obviously going to relate it to investing. So if you want to get access to that, go to focuscompoundinggazette.com. If you're on YouTube or the podcast app, that will be in the show notes. And feel free to sign up there for free. You get a bunch of ideas from Jeffrey. Also, if you're not following me on Twitter, go to at Focus Compound on Twitter. I tweet out a bunch of investing principle stuff and just kind of everything related to investing, so be sure to check that out. So speaking of that, today, and what's today? Today's Wednesday.
Okay.
I tweeted out a post that you wrote up, I believe in 2017.
All right.
And it was on reading. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was interesting, and we've talked about reading on here before on the podcast a long time ago, though, and we talked about you wrote about how if you are reading more practical investing books or investing books on, the theory behind investing, instead of reading a bunch of 10Ks, you're reading more of those, you're doing it wrong. And I think a lot of people sort of fall into that trap, especially from my correspondence with people that reach out. And I know at one point I kind of fell into that trap as well. You feel like you have to pretty much learn all the fundamentals, and which you do, of course. But then I think it takes away from actually just reading the 10Ks to learn about all these different businesses. Yeah. And I always say that I learned more about investing when I stopped reading a bunch of investing books, which is kind of interesting. So I thought maybe we could spend some time, first of all, what are your favorite investing books other than Stock Market Genius? So really just books that people could take away to become better investors. And then we could just talk about like reading 10Ks and your process for doing that.
Okay. So my favorite investing books, you can be a Stock Market Genius, like you said, but also anything that is all about sort of case studies, like a fund manager's actual day-to-day, what they bought and why they did it and stuff. So I like all the Peter Lynch books, so One Up on Wall Street, Beating the Street.
I got some up there.
Yeah. And there was books, John Neff died not that long ago, and he had written a book that I liked. A lot of people find it pretty boring, but I think it's a good book. He was like a low PE type investor. I've mentioned before, There's Always Something to Do. That's a good book. And any of those sorts of things. And, of course, in terms of more theory books, Phil Fisher and Ben Graham. So the Intelligent Investor is probably the easiest one for people to read, although I like Security Analysis a lot.
Yeah.
And
boring.
Yeah.
I wish I had a drop. Boring alert, boring alert, boring alert.
And then Phil Fisher, you have, he wrote a couple books. The famous one is Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits.
Yeah.
But I also like Conservative Investors Sleep Well, and so there was another one that he wrote too. So, yeah, all of those are good.
Yeah, and do you have any books that you reread every single year?
I think we've talked before that I do reread parts of the Snowball.
Okay,
yeah.
For like inspiration purposes or what? Because I like to listen. I've probably listened to that book like 5 times, and I'm like, okay, so we're in Warren Buffett 1.0 days. I need some inspiration. So I like re-listen to it.
I think more for the just what he did in his partnership days and stuff. Yeah, for some of the most specific ones. That's an interesting book because Alice Schroeder, who wrote that book, did a lot of research, and only a small part of it really goes into the book. But there are like these little details that are really great in there.
Yeah,
especially about the parts that people don't know that much about, like his partnership years and some things like that. How he would invest in a company, find out about it.
Yeah, no, that was definitely my favorite part too. And what's interesting, and we've spoken about this, she gave an AMA and asked me anything on Reddit once, and she just answered like a bunch of questions. And again, it's going back to, I always talk about, we probably can't get into contact with Warren, but you can learn about a lot about these individuals that you're interested in just by people that have been around them a lot. And she just answered questions on him for days, and I thought that was interesting. So you could Google that. It's on Reddit. Alice Schroeder, Ask Me Anything, and of course it was all about Warren. But what's interesting too is that they don't even talk anymore. She has said. Was that surprising to you?
No.
I wonder. I mean, I guess it's very.
I read the book, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, because of she almost alternates between personal business, and the personal stuff is why I'm sure they don't talk.
Yeah. And I think he doesn't. I wonder if he just remembers it differently or what. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think he said that before, that people will remember it differently. And
choose the less flattering
one. Less flattering version, yeah.
Yeah, well, you kind of open up yourself to a lot. I feel like a lot of criticism.
Yeah,
when
but
you
he produced a good book that way.
No,
so,
totally. Yeah, it was a great book. What? So you Phil Fisher's books, Peter Lynch's books. So obviously, Stock Market Genius, our strategy is all behind that. What are some good 10Ks that you think people could start to read to learn more about investing?
People ask
Is it just read anything or what?
Yeah, people ask that a lot, and I think it's the ones they want to read are like ones where management kind of lays it out for you and it's easy, I guess. They want to read like a Berkshire Hathaway type thing.
Sure.
But I think it's better to read ones that you have to figure it out for yourself that way. So the easiest ones are something about it already.
You're familiar with the product.
Yeah. So
the company.
The easiest one is, what industry do you work in? Okay, so if you work in financial services, read something about financial services. Do you easy ones are, do you go to a movie theater? Yes, then read a movie theater one, because it'll be easier for you. You'll understand what their gross margins on concessions are and stuff. You know what that kind of product is. You can picture it in your mind.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas if you're reading about, honestly, some sorts of things, you just have no idea what you might be reading about. If you're reading about something that's like a business to business technology company or something, and you have nothing to do with business software things or something like that, you just won't have an idea, because you don't know the customers and the suppliers, and you don't know the product. You don't know how it's sold and those sorts of things. But you might have dealt with a bank before. So if you read about like an investment bank, well, unless you're in that kind of industry, you might not have any idea how to read that 10K. But if you read about a retail bank, if you're reading about that part of Wells Fargo's business or something, well, you bank with a Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase or whatever, so you have some ideas about how that works.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And I think that's what I did when I first started off, was I read Nike's annual report or Apple's annual report, because in my head I could picture everything. Yeah. And I felt like learning more about the business side of things, it was a lot easier to grasp.
Yeah,
almost.
It is easier often to pick a small company that way, though.
Yeah, because they don't have multiple product lines and stuff. Yeah.
So some of those are very focused, like Apple's very focused, Nike's very focused. But when you get to things, if you're reading about Microsoft or something, actually a large part of Microsoft's 10K doesn't have anything to do with Windows and Office, even though that's the big part of their business. They talk about lots of other things they do too. So having like one product line companies is really good, or companies that have one location or something. We were talking about a company that operates like theme park type things. That's very easy. Everyone right now could go. There's probably half a dozen publicly traded companies that in the U.S. that do things related to some sort of theme park or something. You could easily read it. You probably visit at least a location or something. You can look it up online, see pictures and things. That kind of thing helps a lot. If you can read reviews, see pictures, something to actually see how it works in the real world, that helps. Because most people who have problems with 10Ks, I think it gets too abstract for them. They're reading about some business, they have no idea how it works.
Sure. It's drawn up by lawyers too. So I feel like adding some context to whatever it is that you're reading about is good. You wrote a post once about, and we always talk about this idea of like deep work, and it's a fascinating topic to me. And I know you said that the book wasn't your favorite. You didn't like the book, but you liked the concept, and you wrote that. So that's not me just saying that. You actually put that out there that you didn't think the book was too great. But you like the idea behind it and the concept. The concept
is very important.
Yeah.
So I recommend people read the book.
Yeah.
Many books I read, I like the subject matter of it. I'm not saying that the treatment of it by the author is the best.
Yeah. And so I guess when it comes to like getting better, right? So like getting better with not only just reading, but like reading 10Ks and just understanding. I mean, this concept of deep work, I think they're sort of tied together.
Yeah.
So if people could look to improve on their deep work, what would you suggest? And I think it's unique how you do it, right? And this is something that even me, I consciously have to make an effort to improve on, right? it's kind of silly to say out loud, but I mean, so huge marketing for us obviously is Twitter,
right?
And now we're doing YouTube and all these different things, and it's like kind of like notifications and everything. So there's so much more being thrown out to you, which is why I think this concept of deep work, if you can master it, right, whatever that means, it will only give you an edge. Yeah. And I think the way that you do it is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I actually read a book recently called Hyperfocus, and which is a lot like deep work.
Is it a new book?
I don't know if it's a very new book, but it's a fairly new book.
Yeah.
And not by the same author of deep work, but similar idea. If people like deep work, they'll like the book Hyperfocus.
Yeah. I just wrote it down.
But
I'm gonna get that book.
Yeah, but the reason I thought it was interesting is not so much that it taught me anything that way, except it was like they were describing how I work usually.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of times people talk about how it's important to how can they be the most productive and fitting and reading the most 10Ks or something. But the real issue is not that for most people listening to this. So like most people, even if you could just do one 10K a week, basically, one stock a week that you could study, you could do 50 in a year. Well, if you have a fairly good method of you listen to our podcast, you read certain threads or blogs or whatever, you get some ideas and then you just write them down, and then over a year you go through them. 50 ideas, if you pick out of that, the 5 stocks you want or something, is enough to be an investor with no problems. So you don't need to be looking at more than one stock a week, but you do need to really focus on it. And what happens to a lot of people is more like what you talked about in your What's on Andrew's Mind, which is, I think you were talking about Charlie Munger calling it twaddle talk.
Yeah, twaddle tendency.
Twaddle tendency.
Yeah,
exactly. Which is true. Instead of focusing on learning all about this specific company, right? People get into a lot of stuff about different people's opinions on the industry or whatever, much more superficial sorts of things, and almost like social sorts of things.
He calls it like chauffeur knowledge.
Right, exactly.
He gives like an example of, oh, this is such an easy question, let me have my chauffeur answer it.
Right.
Because, that's a fun metaphor.
Exactly. And and often people get the most superficial sort of knee-jerk reaction to something like an industry or whatever. Yeah. So we've talked about that, like we own NACO. Whatever our opinions are on it and things like that. The problem that you can have is some people can just think, well, coal. And that's what are the first thoughts that come to mind and stuff. What you have to do is you have to actually read the 10K of whatever you're doing and learn about the business and then make a decision on it. And often your initial impressions will be right that way. But so the way to do that is like what that deep work thing was talking about. I've said before, set a timer.
Yeah,
I recommend setting a timer for eventually like 90 minutes. I don't think you want to go much longer than about 90 minutes because almost everyone will sort of start to get bored.
Yeah,
and then re-energized eventually.
Yeah, your mind will wander
Even
off.
If you're watching a movie, if it's a 3-hour movie, there's a lull in the middle for you, and then it comes back. And so that's my recommendation to people is 90 minutes. You can start with an hour or something, but to really just focus on that. And the reason for setting a timer is the reason for picking a short amount of time is that you can like block it out and say, okay, I don't have to do anything for the next 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't say, well, I don't have to do anything for the next afternoon.
You're designating that time to,
and that's it. And then you set a timer so that you're not looking at any sort of clock. You're not looking at your cell phone or whatever. You're instead just the timer will go off when it's done, and then you'll just stop looking at the 10K or whatever. If you really focus on just one stock for 90 minutes at a time, you're going to be so far ahead of other investors.
Yeah.
And then you just repeat that with, if you have a week or something, repeat that with 5 different stocks in the same industry or something,
And then even if you could, I think, try to stay disciplined to do it even 60 minutes a day.
Right, exactly.
And that's when I think you really see the effects, take off.
Yeah, and that relates to another thing Charlie Munger said, which was that he sold himself
an
hour
hour
of his
a day.
Yeah. And that's a great thing. And for a lot of people, it will be something like that. I mean, the easiest thing of all for a lot of people, a lot of office workers, is just going an hour earlier.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
No matter how many hours of sleep I get, it's still a mission for me to get up in the morning. No, I could do it.
But because if you try to do, for a lot of people, we'll see, but for a lot of people, if you try to do an hour at the end of your day,
hey, you're too tired.
Yeah. And there's also the other big risk is that a lot of times, and actually this is good in Hyperfocus talking about it, is how often people interrupt themselves, but they have a tendency to blame the other people around them because it's convenient. They want to be interrupted, basically. Yeah. So if there's people around you needing whatever, then it's like, oh, I have to answer this email. instead of I have to look at this 10K.
You want me to take that trash out? Okay, please.
Yeah, exactly. You reorganize your desk 100 times or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what most people find, certainly what I find, is that you might not be too excited to read a 10K before starting. I mean, a lot of times actually I am excited to read the 10K before starting, but most of the time probably. But for many people, they're not. And what they'll find though is that after those first few minutes when they really get into it is the problem. Once they're really doing it, it's not a chore to get through 90 minutes of it.
Yeah.
It's the starting and the first 5 minutes of what am I doing?
Yeah, you kind of get in like the groove of it, or whatever.
And what I do is I have a pen and I always have a calculator. To make sure that because my feeling is if I don't have a calculator, then it's easy to be lazy and not do calculations for yourself.
Yeah,
but
sure.
if you do, then you're writing everywhere.
In a real calculator too. I mean, it sounds so silly that we have to but this is kind of the way I do it. Is I use a real calculator.
Yeah,
I prefer paper, and a lot of people say, does it help you remember more? Right. It's really, for me personally, it's like a focus thing.
Yeah,
I feel like I could actually I retain it better. I'm actually more in the groove of it. Right. There's no notifications.
And you're only doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so easy for people to say, oh, well, let me just check. This is what most people will do, is they'll be looking at the stock, even reading the 10K. If they're reading something online or something, they'll immediately open up a tab and check Yahoo Finance or check,
or Google something, which they, if you want to look at like the location of, which is good to do, but me personally, like the 60 minutes or whatever that you block off, it should be your deep work time where you're not surfing the web or doing anything.
And I can't tell you often I get someone talking to me about a stock they've looked at for a while, and they talk about the price ratio or something, and actually they've pulled the ratio from a website. Whereas you don't really need to know it exactly. In more general terms, if they know it's trading at 8, 9, 10 times free cash flow, if they just look at 3 years of it, they would have that general impression, no problem. But they instead pulled from whatever the thing said about the EV to EBITDA or whatever, which could be right or could be wrong. But they should have an opinion about it that would be really easy to know from reading the 10K and. I mean, read deep work and read hyperfocus. Whether I like the treatment that the author gave of the concepts, I think they're really important concepts. And it is the one thing when people ask me, like, the hardest part about being an investor or something, I do notice, especially with now and with younger people, the difficulties of that you have to just stop listening to other people at some point, go away and just form your opinion about a stock. It's the opposite of the social aspect of it and stuff. And and now it's fine to have both. Yeah. And then at other times, like you might get ideas generally from something where you're talking to a lot of different people and stuff, or you might talk an idea through with someone afterwards. You posted something about Buffett saying it's better not to talk to people about an idea,
which I disagreed with.
Yeah, and
to a point,
and I think that it's generally true that you should avoid talking to someone about it. I think it's good once you have a very strong opinion, and if you have this sort of personality where you're not going to be swayed by someone else's opinion, which he certainly does, then I think you're fine. Yeah, but it's very important not to form your initial opinion as like a group talking about a stock. Yeah, go off and form the initial opinion.
And that's what I wrote about in the Gazette. On my What's on Andrew's Mind column I was just saying that I do think it's good to talk to other people after you form your own opinion to understand, like when I call it the variant perception, or that's what people call what does the market think, so then you could kind of try to weigh, okay, are they correct, are they wrong, do I see their point, do I agree with them? But I completely agree with that.
And talking to other people also often sparks something that gives you that directs you in the direction you need to do the work that you need. Often you often get an idea or something from talking to a lot of people. Now, at least for me, and I'm sure for Buffett, you talk to people and hear 1,000 ideas, and you go, "Oh, there's 10 that sounded good from what I heard." The ratio is not good in terms of the same thing's true. He reads a lot of newspapers and things. I find news is not a very in terms of the amount of time you spend on, is a very valuable use of your time.
So what I started doing was using almost like a summarizer, like compoundnews.com or abnormal returns or whatever, and they just post what they think is the most, I guess, newsworthy items of the day. So you're not reading all the fluff. It's just really here's this. So I think that's good for like a time management purpose.
Yeah, what I actually do is before I click on something or read something, whatever, and what I actually do, I think I've mentioned this before, is usually what I do is I decide to read something. Yeah. and then I will print it out and read it later or something. I put together a bunch of reading at certain times. So I'll read for a couple hours instead of, reading and doing some other stuff and reading some more and whatever online. I don't read and then answer some emails and then read and then, But what I do is I look and decide if this is something that's going to be of practical use to me. And for us, that's really easy because we focus on just overlooked stocks.
Yeah.
So I literally will look up the stock and see if it's overlooked at all, or
quick
things
filter.
related to it is.
Sure.
And if there's nothing like that, like I was reading something about title insurers or something, I looked it up and they're not really overlooked. So I dropped it. Although it sounded interesting what I was reading, I decided that it wasn't, something that we were going to end up buying. So I eliminated it. And that's useful. If I talk to a lot of people who I kind of know immediately they're not really going to buy that like reinsurance company because they don't feel like they understand reinsurance well enough or whatever, which is fine. But then just eliminate it. They will sometimes spend a lot more time on the ideas they don't buy, the complicated ones, the ones that they're not really sure about, even though from the beginning I knew you're not really going to buy that. You're just not going to get comfortable with it. I think people can tell fairly early on whether there's something there that they might be able to get comfortable with. And that's a skill that you have to develop. Buffett, I think, is really good at that. It's not just saying yes or no right away, but it's also knowing, is this something I could figure out? And that's something that you get better at over time.
Sure, yeah. Because he always talks about, like, if it's something that's very important to the investment case, but you can't figure it out, forget about it.
Yes.
But if it's something that isn't important and you can't figure out, okay, potentially that's okay. But if it's something that you can figure out and it's important, then obviously that's great.
Yeah.
So if you had to come up with a couple hacks, I guess you could say, I feel like our generation's all about these hacks, productivity hacks. And
that may be part of what I was talking about.
I mean, what would you say? So if I could give a couple first.
Okay.
Read the real annual reports or 10Ks filings. I feel like a lot of people will actually benefit more from that.
Yeah.
Get a Kindle.
Yeah.
If you're not going to read on real paperback books. So I prefer the Kindle because it's very small. So for my eyes, it's just easier going from left to right. And also there's no notifications. That's all you're doing on there is just the task at hand. You're just reading. There's nothing popping. And then I would say, what would I say? Take notes on real paper, not just like on like the computer.
Yes.
And then what would you say?
I would actually say read those two books too. By the way, Deep Work and Hyperfocus, because they are full of those sorts of hacks. Yeah, I'd say that's true. And
listen to, this is one thing I do is I listen. So if it's like a biography type book, like The Snowball, that's a good book for me to listen to. It's not too technical.
Right.
It's more of like a information book. I feel like it's like not Snowball. Gosh, we were just talking about it. Ben Graham. Gosh, I can't even. Not The Intelligent Master.
The Intelligent Master.
The book I said is very boring.
Security Analysis.
Security Analysis.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Oh, you don't want to listen to
Don't listen to that book. That's like a technical book that you're going to want to read, right? But like Snowball, for example, that's a good book to listen to.
Right.
So if you want to get through more books, I feel like that's a good way to do it. Is download Audible. I'm a big Audible fan.
I mostly, I don't listen to books that much. I have listened to some books. I've listened to Snowball and some things like that.
Yeah.
But I do read what's interesting is they're not the books people ask me about, but mostly I read books about businesses and business biography type things.
Yeah.
So actually the one that I was reading today before coming here was Junk to Gold, which is not probably a well-known book or something, but it's by the founder of Copart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's just his story and stuff. It's his personal story as well as like that sort of thing. And there's a ton of these sorts of books out. Some of them are not that well written. Some are well written, whatever. But they're interesting, and they're often by a founder or someone who has access to a founder or something. I also like reading ones about companies where it went badly too. I've read plenty of those too. Yeah. Those are always interesting.
Yeah, I love horror stories.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you've read a lot about like frauds and scandals and things.
Short selling,
I mean more like companies that once were big and aren't anymore. Like I think what was I read one about Burger Chef. Wait, Burger Chef, do I mean that? Yeah, there was something. I think it's the company that was mentioned in Mad Men, which was a major chain a long time ago. Circuit City, BlackBerry,
Circuit
Palm,
City.
Any of those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Circuit City. That's so funny. Cool. Well, so I think that was a pretty good place to stop. So again, read hard copies.
Yeah.
If you can, get a Kindle. Turn your phone off. Don't go on Twitter. Read real 10Ks.
Yeah.
Set a timer.
Yes.
and then read those 2 books. And I think that would be a good summary for
Yeah,
people.
also, there's another book that I have read. Don't particularly care one way or the other about it, but lots of people tell me that it helped them a lot. How to Read a Book.
That is... I got
Do you
that.
have it?
I
Do you
got
like it
that
a
right
lot?
there. Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I read it. I think it's a fine book,
Yeah.
but I didn't find it to be that helpful in reading books, but
it's
other
good.
people find it
Yeah.
helpful.
It's good for investors, too.
Yeah. Well, like, I think Charlie Munger said that he does not take notes or anything. He just reads whatever he wants and didn't he say that?
Yeah.
And I find that true for my general reading. That is how I read most things.
Mm-hmm.
Although I did, one thing that I found useful is I got bookmarks that just have space for writing notes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the one thing I do with things that aren't so normally I read Kindle books, and I've had a Kindle since they came out, basically.
Yeah.
But the things that I take notes on that I care a lot about are names of people, company names, and things I don't recognize.
Yeah.
To find another book to read on the same subject, you know. So, like I've said, like their bibliography or their works cited is usually the thing I care the most about. What books did they use to write this book?
Sure. Yeah.
Then go and read
Go
those
read
books.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Well, I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in with us here today at the Focus Compounding Podcast. Be sure to sign up for the weekly Gazette that gets sent out, and if you like 2,000 minimum word write-ups on stocks. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter, and if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and thumbs it up. That will give us some exposure and also notify you when we upload a video. I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in. We'll see you in the next podcast. Take care.
Hey, this is Geoff Gannon, and that was the Focus Compounding Podcast, the podcast where Andrew and I talk general investing concepts. To learn about specific stocks I like, go to focuscompoundinggazette.com. That's focuscompoundinggazette.com, and enter your email. Once you enter your email, you'll start getting one free 2,000-word stock write-up a week. Andrew and I also manage accounts for clients. To learn more about our managed accounts, email Andrew at info@focuscompounding.com or text or call Andrew at 469-207-5844. Thanks for listening.